Welcome, Judi Miller. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today. I'm super excited for this interview. The whole theme is talking about perfect and that we are all perfect. So I'm very intrigued to learn more about your upcoming book that's being released and talk about actually how you came to the realization that not only are you perfect, but we are all perfect, and how those of us that may not feel perfect can do that for themselves. So thank you so much for being with us today. I'd like to start out by reading your bio, and then we'll get started right in the interview. So Judi Miller started her career as a certified public accountant and went on to excel in the world of corporate finance for over 20 years. Most of her life has been dedicated to personal development and helping others excel in a constantly changing environment. Over the past several years, Judi's interest shifted towards spirituality. Her growth was no longer aimed at making herself better. Instead, she began to focus on finding her intrinsic wholeness. This shift brought her numerous lessons around the nature of the Creator, forgiveness, and the trajectory each soul follows throughout the course of many lives. Today, sharing these lessons is an integral part of her journey. As a coach, speaker, and author, she shares her relatable and heartfelt messages with others who want to awaken to their true greatness and experience lasting happiness. Judi has trained with some of the world's most spiritual visionaries and is certified in the energy codes, Happy for No Reason, and the Passion Test. She is available for keynote speeches and workshops. She will inspire you to live a more passionate life filled with greater clarity, joy, and happiness. Welcome, Judi.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's so great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here today. So I want to start out. I know a little bit about your story and your journey. And something near and dear to my heart is fear. As somebody myself who has struggled with a lot of fear, anxiety, and panic disorder throughout my life, I know you've had similar experiences. So, and today when we're doing this interview, we're in the midst of a pandemic, a worldwide pandemic, the coronavirus. And so there are a lot of people who are experiencing fear and uncertainty. And so I want to get your perspective on, how did you rise above fear in your life? Tell us a little bit about that.
So that's a great question, Jennifer. Like many of you, including yourself, you probably had fears also as a child. So as a child, I was afraid of drowning. I was terrified of the dark, and I was also terrified of being sexually assaulted. And the sexual assault, I've never been assaulted, but that's something that I've actually only shared with people recently as part of this story. So these fears have plagued me for most of my life, and Perfect actually talks about how I was able to overcome those fears.
And Perfect is your new book, which is coming out on July 21st, if I understand correctly.
That's correct.
That's perfect. And we'll talk a little bit more about the book as we get into the interview. I'd also like to talk about, in a previous conversation we had, you talked about as a child, and going into adolescent years and even early adulthood, frankly, that you had this notion of struggling to fit in. And I know so many listeners, either themselves have had this experience or their children may be having this experience. Tell us a little bit about that and how you overcame that.
That's an interesting question. So I moved to the United States from Trinidad when I was 4 years old. And my book is not about race or discrimination whatsoever, but I didn't look like everybody around me. I was also born with 11 fingers, so that made me stand out even more. And then also I could sense and feel spirit at night. So there was a large part of me that I felt very different from those around me, and I actually tried to hide myself. I didn't want to be seen. I didn't want to be heard. So that plagued me for most of my life.
Do you think that contributed to some of the fears that you had as well?
Absolutely. But not only feeling different, but I also struggled with feeling incomplete because I was hiding myself from the world. I also felt, and maybe your listeners have felt the same way, I felt unworthy, that I always had to prove myself to belong.
Mm. So did you fall into the rat race of working hard and, never feeling like it was enough and, constantly being that overachiever?
Absolutely. So I actually commuted 3 hours a day to work. I worked 40 to 50 hours a week. I raised two kids, and I was always trying to make everybody happy. But deep inside, I wasn't happy.
Mm. Well, you've certainly overcome that, struggle in your life because as somebody who, I see you, but nothing happy now. And you know, um, actually being who we are is what perfect is all about, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's the realization that we are perfect the way we are. We don't have to prove anything. We are already born worthy.
But but let's talk a little bit about perfect because perfect is, as somebody myself who's been a lifelong perfectionist and who's worked tirelessly to get there, um, like like why perfect? Like you hear um, that we're perfect, whole, and complete, but to you, what does that really mean?
That there's nothing wrong with us. And it's kind of hard to explain it without kind of going through the story because it was a transformation and a journey that got me to that realization. And then when I got to that realization, life just became so much easier.
That's
I could let
fantastic.
go, I could let go of the struggles, and life became truly miraculous.
So, if I understand correctly, then really what you're pointing to, and I know your book will probably share your journey in a much more detailed manner. But what you're really getting at is like, we create our own world or our reality through our thoughts and our actions and our words. So, are you saying here that, part of your rising above the struggle and the fear and the suffering that you felt on the inside, when you started to change or pivot what was happening on the inside, that your outer world just miraculously changed too?
Absolutely. So the way that we feel about ourselves, so as you mentioned before, I felt different. I felt like I didn't belong. And because I felt that way, I projected that onto everything. I felt like I didn't belong in my family, my husband's family. Culturally, religiously, we're very different. But I realized in the end that that was just my projection. And once we begin to let go of our stories, we realize that it really only is a projection. So thoughts like things are not real, and our stories may not be real or accurate either.
How has this how has this changed your relationships with your husband, with your kids, with your family? Having this realization and this transformation, how has this, shaped your life as it is today?
I have a greater sense of inner peace. I accept people for who they are. They accept me for who I am. I'm not judging them, labeling them. Life becomes so much easier.
Wow, that's fantastic. So what would you say to listeners who may be dealing with, fear, uncertainty, and anxiety in these times? What would your message be to them?
So, ultimately, I believe all emotions fall into two categories. They either fall into love or fear.
Mm.
And fear really is just a contracted energy. It's a contracted story about the things that we wish that we could have changed in the past or the things that we're afraid of in the future. And when we let go of that fear, the only thing that's left is love, and that's who we are. So events are going to happen to all of us. We all have painful or unwanted events. But how do we approach it? Do we come from it from a place of love, or do we come from it from a place of fear? And that can totally transform the way that we look at life.
Yeah, that's powerful, right? So it's actually, rather than a place to get to, what you're saying is it's a place to come from. So that every moment of every day we have choices, right? Life is moving about whether we like it or not, and every moment we have a choice, and we have a choice to come from a place of fear or come from a place of love, and our actions will be different depending on where we choose to come from. And right now, I mean, if you turn on the news or you spend a lot of time on social media these days, there's a lot of fear that is being, aired out there. And so, what do you recommend to people, when they are, in that state of fear or in a lower vibrational energy, such as anger or jealousy or resentment, you've got this like crazy zany thing. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, to tell you, way back in the 80s, you might remember Stephen Covey wrote a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Yes.
And, there was a lot of wisdom in that book, but there was one thing that really stuck out for me. He said, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space, we get to choose our response. So at the time, it was for me, do I come from a contracted energy or do I come from a loving energy? Do I come from a negative story or a positive story? So that really changed my whole world in terms of I actually have control of how I see the world. But I know that I always have certain stories that I fall back into, like the grooves on a record. You keep playing it over and over and over again. And I know about this, space that I can choose from. But like everyone else, I fall back into my old habits. So, my husband, sometimes we get into arguments, and maybe you could relate to this. You get into an argument with someone, and sometimes you totally forget what you're arguing about, but you have to prove your point. You have to be right. And you just get really, really stuck in that rut. Well, I learned this from Tony Robbins, and you may have actually heard different variations of it. Sometimes people say cancel clear when they have a negative thought or emotion. They say cancel clear, or they put a rubber band on their wrist and they sting themselves.
Yeah.
Well, I learned this from Tony many, many years ago, and I call it zany crazy thing because that's what it is to me. So do something crazy that just gets you totally out of that state. So whenever my husband and I get into an argument and we're so just trying to prove our point, we have this thing where whoever remembers first will reach over and grab the other person's nose. And then, all of a sudden it just gets you totally out of state. You're laughing, you're giggling, you're crying. And then oftentimes I can't even remember what I was arguing about. But it's so easy for us to fall back into old habits. But if we really break it up so it can't replay itself by doing something crazy or zany, it really helps for me. And I think it can help for many people as well.
I'm never going to let that visual image go of pinching the nose. I think it's brilliant. And what a disruptor, right? Because talk about, I've done a lot of courses with Tony Robbins, and so I just absolutely love him. And, I love it. Like, can you just imagine being in the heat of the moment, with your spouse or a friend or, whomever it be, and then all of a sudden you just lean over and it's like all of a sudden you just forget about everything else that you were doing. It's perfect. I love it.
He actually gave an example, and I am not recommending this, but he was talking to a woman and she was getting into this cycle of negativity about her husband. And every time she brought it up, he would pour water in her face. He would take a glass of water and splash it in her face. And she was like, what, wait, what's happening? And then, she would start talking to him, and then she'd get back into that negative cycle, and then he would splash water in her face. Well, Jennifer, you can guess what happens. She stops talking about that negativity.
It's perfect though, I would say, this also works for our inner dialogue, right? So if you are one of those people like I used to be, who my self-talk, you would not want to hear my inside voice to myself. It wasn't typically pleasant or joyful by any sense of the means. And, and it really does work. I've actually done the elastic band piece, wearing it around my wrist. And whenever I had, a negative thought or, negative inner dialogue towards myself for not having it perfect or not doing something right or not doing it the way that it should have been done, then I would just snap that. And it does work. It hurts, but it does work because it got me to realize, no, this is not the path I want to go down. I don't want to beat myself up. I do not want to, entertain arguments with myself or anyone else, and really who I want to be is somebody who is loving and kind and compassionate. Doesn't mean I am perfect all the time. It doesn't mean I always do that. But when we can, condition ourselves to always come from a place of love, life does become so much easier. At least that's been my experience.
Right, absolutely. And, if you like visuals, Marcy Shimoff wrote The Four It's Perfect. And she, in the forward, she talks about Angelise Arian. She is a cultural anthropologist. And she says, it's important for us to share our stories with people who are loving and supportive, but only 3 times. Because if we repeat it more than 3 times, it gets stuck. It becomes our identity. It becomes us. So in some indigenous cultures, you're allowed to share your story 3 times. But if you share it more than 3 times, they take you and hang you over a cliff. They hang you over a cliff until you're willing to let go of that story. And it's just a beautiful story that makes me think, okay, if I'm doing this more than 3 times, I don't want to be hanging out over that cliff. So that's worked for me as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be hanging over the cliff either. Somebody who has constantly had a fear of heights, and I'm constantly doing what I can to overcome that fear. That is not something I would want by any sense of the means. So could you, getting back to your book, Perfect, could you give us a Reader's Digest view of your new book, which is coming out again on July 21st, so just a week away now? Can you just give us a Reader's Digest version of it?
Sure. We were talking about fears before. So I had those 3 fears as a child, but the fear of the dark and the fear of sexual assault is the ones that really haunted me. So every night when I went to sleep, I could literally feel spirits around me, and I didn't know if they were there to help me or to harm me. So as a child, I would crawl into bed, pull the covers over my head, and I would recite the Lord's Prayer over and over again, just begging for the spirits to go away until I would fall asleep exhausted. And Jennifer, this was my life. This was my ritual night after night, and this continued well into my 20s. So you mentioned I started my career as a CPA. So here I am in my 20s, going to work, and then coming home at night, crawling into bed, terrified of things that I couldn't explain, and I didn't know where these fears were coming from. And then I got married, and then I had kids. And in the exhaustion of raising kids and working, everything stopped. It became quiet again.
Mm.
And then my kids grew up and went off to college, and then the house became silent. And in that silence, the whispers, the energies, the spirits came back. And I think you might know what that terror feels like.
I
Your
do.
listeners might know what that terror feels like also. But a great way is, when somebody jumps out in front of you, your heart starts to race. Your senses are on full alert. And I think for a lot of people, those sensations only last for a couple of seconds. But for some of us, it could actually last much longer,
Mm-hmm.
right? So at night, I would wake up terrified, clutching at my husband. We both started to lose sleep. So at the same time, I started to bleed uncontrollably month after month. And I went to see my doctor, and she recommended that I get a hysterectomy. And I was terrified of the surgery, and I really didn't understand why. I worked in the healthcare industry for 25 years, and I trusted modern medicine implicitly,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it was the same terror that I felt as a child. It was the same terror that returned as an adult. So, at the recommendation of a friend, I went to see a psychic, and the psychic told me to read a book called Light Emerging by Barbara Brennan. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if you've ever heard of the book. Barbara was a NASA physicist, and she could actually heal people with her hands. And days before my surgery, I found myself Googling healers near me. And as I sat across from my healer for that very first time, I literally heard a click of a lock. Sometimes I just hear things. And at the time, I didn't realize that everything was locking or clicking into place. I didn't realize that the role that healer, my healer, would have in my family history. So I worked with my healer. She helped me heal from surgery. And in the subsequent months, we started to explore my fear of the dark. I never told her of sexual assault. I've never been assaulted. I've actually never shared that with anyone until this book. Um, so as we looked at my fears, we started to explore childhood experiences. Was there anything from my childhood that triggered these events? And nothing came to light. So then we looked at past lives. Is there anything from a past life that might actually carry forward to this life that's causing that fear? And she introduced me to some amazing work, the work of Dr. Brian Weiss, Dr. Michael Newton, Dolores Cannon. And I was really amazed by some of the experiences that they were able to share. But also, we know that DNA, we inherit certain things from our parents, certain physical traits, the color of our hair, the color of our eyes, our nose, our physical characteristics. But the science of epigenetics also says that we can inherit the pain and the trauma that our parents and our ancestors actually experienced. And, they've shown studies with Holocaust survivors where that pain and that trauma actually carries down to their children. I just recently heard a study that I thought was amazing. So it was with rats, and they would expose the rat or the mice to the smell of lavender, and then they would shock the mice.
Wow.
So these mice became petrified of the smell of lavender. But Jennifer, their children and their offspring were triggered by that smell of lavender and would also experience that pain and that trauma as well. So I started to explore it further, and one of the things that I learned is every female baby is born with 3 million of their reproductive eggs.
Wow.
Right? So the egg that would become you was already in your mother at birth. So
Mm.
some of the pain and the trauma that your mother experienced, you were actually there. So that fear of the dark, that fear of sexual assault wasn't actually my fear. It was actually the fear, the cellular memory that I got from my mother. And I don't want to give away the end of the
No.
book, but there is a shocking past life connection to the very person that I trusted to heal me. And, Jennifer, in that revelation, I could have felt fear, betrayal, anger, but I didn't. All I felt was love. And that's how I know that everything and everyone is perfect. In that moment of revelation, all I felt was the divine beauty and perfection of the universe. And I realized that we are never alone, never abandoned, and always loved. So that's where perfect came from.
I love it. Um, I love it. And you've got to read the book. I was fortunate enough to preview the book before it came out, and it is a page turner. It was one I couldn't put down. And for me, uh, to not be able to put a book down says a lot about a book. Because it takes a lot to keep me interested and captivated, and your book is definitely that. It is eye-opening. It is transformational. At one point, I was in tears, and it's just miraculous, actually. And so it's definitely an amazing book and an amazing story. So my next question is, who is the book designed for, and what do you hope the reader will walk away with after reading your transformational book?
You know, it's really in the beginning of the book. It's really was intended for people who felt different, incomplete, not worthy. And the reason I ask people those questions is because that's the feelings that plagued me for most of my life. But it's also for anyone who wants to forgo or let go of. And for me, it's letting go of the stories that no longer serves us, the fear, the pain that no longer serves us. So I do think, even though my story might sound a little unusual or uncommon to some people, I really do feel that it holds a promise for us all.
Mm, absolutely. Absolutely. And I know your book talks about, and you're big into forgiveness. So can you talk a little bit about forgiveness and why you believe it's so vital for everyone to learn how to forgive and to love more deeply?
hmm And it's interesting because forgiveness is a very charged word, meaning that there's so many different opinions and definitions of forgiveness. So for me, forgiveness is very simple. One of the definitions that I love is to just forego and let go of. It's to forego the stories, the pain, the contracted energies that no longer serve us. And like we were talking before, painful and unwanted events is going to happen to all of us, right? So, we could either experience that event once, or we could experience that event over and over, hundreds, even thousands of times. So forgiveness is really letting go of that pain so we could truly experience ultimate freedom. It truly is a gift to ourselves.
It absolutely is. As somebody who has been through a lot of traumatic experiences in my life, more recently with the Boston Marathon bombings, I was reluctant to forgive in the beginning. And how I felt physically and emotionally by hanging on to that anger and resentment literally was eating away at me, and frankly slowly killing me.
hmm
And I thought, even though I had certainly done forgiveness work prior to that, I thought, how could I forgive two people who took everything that I once loved and had away, and my life, as I knew it, was gone and shattered. And but it wasn't until I actually chose to forgive them that pure peace came into my life. my healing exponentially soared. My life started to heal on a much bigger and profound level, to the point where I am completely, come full circle from that experience. It doesn't, I no longer have flashbacks. I no longer have PTSD. I no longer have the physical stuff. It is something that has completely, it's an event in my life that I'm no longer triggered by. And I actually see so many gifts that have come from it. And frankly, it actually taught me how to love. It taught me how to love myself in a way in which I never had before. And it taught me how to love others more deeply and start to learn how to love unconditionally.
Mhm. And Jennifer, that's a great point. Forgiveness is really an act of self-love.
It
And
really
it's
is.
beautiful.
It really is nothing to do with the other person. It's about setting ourselves free, stop being the victim of whatever it is. It could be a loss of a job, it could be a divorce, it could be anything. It could be an illness, right? Like, it doesn't have to be as extreme as a terrorist attack, but things happen all the time. And the quicker we can learn to forgive and let go, and learn from it, and resume coming from a place of love, life literally does. I believe it is one of the key components to getting people to where they're thriving in life.
Mhm.
It's a key component in my view.
Right.
But
And you mentioned,
go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead. No, I was going to say, you said that there were certain gifts that you got out of that experience. Have you ever read the book Little Soul in the Sun by Neale Donald Walsch?
I have not.
It's actually, I think it's actually a children's book, but I think it's such a profound book. He's actually the author of the Conversations with God. Do you mind if I just summarize what the book is about?
Sure.
So in heaven, everything is perfect, everything is beautiful, and this little angel of light goes, I would like to learn about forgiveness. And God says, well, everything here is perfect. How can you learn about forgiveness when there's nothing to forgive? And he goes, well, I really want to go to earth and learn about forgiveness. So this beautiful angel of light comes and says, well, I will teach you. And he goes, well, how will you teach me? And she says, well, I will do something so horrific that you're going to have to learn to forgive me. So she said, but when we get to earth, we're going to be pretending so hard to be what we're not, that we're going to forget. I'm going to forget. So please remind me in that moment that we were all perfect. And these are just the lessons that we've came here to experience. Because without the darkness, we can't see the light that we all are. And I just thought that was such a beautiful book. I used to read it to my children, but I think it's a great book for adults as well.
I'm gonna actually go get the book. I've actually read Neale Donald Walsh's book, and I've actually done some courses with him, but I was not aware of his children's book. But I'm gonna pick that up. What a profound message, and such an important message at any age, frankly, to learn. To me, it's a life skill. It's something that you don't forgive once. Events happen in life where forgiveness is a tool in the toolbox, is the way I like to describe it. It's how we restore and return to love.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And and Jennifer, painful things always happen, right? Um, but what happens oftentimes is that the community rallies around, right? They come together as one out of love and compassion, the one that we're supposed to be. So I don't know if I ever shared the story with you. Last year, my niece's best friend was murdered. Um,
Yeah.
she was at a bar with friends. She was in college and she got into an Uber. She thought it was an Uber, but it wasn't. And the man murdered her. And that's such a horrific event. Um, but the good that came out of it was the community rallied together in love to support the family. But also, there was so much awareness about safety in Uber that was just, exposed so many more people to be more aware and more cautious. So, like you said, sometimes there are things that comes out of tragedies that do help us all.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it is, to me, that in those painful moments is where perspective and reframing is vital in those early moments. If we can embrace it as this is an opportunity to grow and to expand, and be better for having the experience, even though we may not like it or wish it may never have happened, it just is. But I believe things happen and we have a choice. We can rise up better from it, or we can turn and be bitter for it. And, you know, two different paths and take you on two different completely life tracks. And so, you know, life is a series of experiences, and some are painful, unfortunately. But it's what wakes us up. You know, it's sometimes the deeper the pain, the more, you know, awake we become, if we allow it to be such.
Hmm. So in my book, I talk about Jill Bolte Taylor's. She wrote My Stroke of Insight. She was a neuroscientist, a Harvard neuroscientist that recovered from brain damage. And one of the things that she talks about in the book is it takes 90 seconds to actually feel an emotion, feel an experience. After that 90 seconds, it's up. It's up to us. Do we create the story? And what's the story that we create? So that's
That's
why it's so, and I know that you are a Dr. Sue fellow facilitator, but after those 90 seconds are up, that's why it's so important to just take it to the body rather than creating a story in our mind that may not serve us.
and actually, and the more that we can just allow our emotions to rise up and through us, we don't hold on to those imprints like that you're speaking about that were passed down from your mom. You know, when we can stop creating the negative stories and the negative beliefs that and hold on to our emotions, because we're afraid of how they're going to feel, or we think in our mind that it's going to go on forever. At least that's how I used to think. Like, I can't handle this. It's going to, you know, once I go there, it's just going to continue. And that's not what happens. And you're right. And it's just like we just continue to learn to dance with life and be in the flow of life. And the more that we can just keep our energy and our vibration clean and optimal, like, life becomes magical and miraculous and joyous, actually.
Hmm. Absolutely.
It's quite profound. Well, um, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you. Super excited for your book to launch. And I know that you've got some really great bonuses. So I want to talk a little bit about that as we wrap up the interview for today. So again, your book, Perfect, actually becomes available on July 21st. You can pre-order it today by going to judimiller.net. We will post the website, so you don't need to worry about the spelling. There'll be a link connected with this interview that you can go to sign up to get a pre-order of her book. And you're giving away 5 bonuses. Can you tell us a little bit about those bonuses?
Sure. So the bonuses are actually from some of my favorite mentors. I believe they're some of the top transformational teachers today. So it includes a happiness ebook from Marcy Shimoff, How to Be Successful. Yes, the Success founder, Deborah Poneman. It includes Dr. Sue. She has a video as well as meditation. And Janet Atwood, the author of The Passion Test, the #1 tool for finding your passions in life, is actually donating 21 meditations on love as well as her ebook. So I'm so grateful for their contributions.
That's fantastic. And so definitely go and pre-order today to capture those free bonuses. In addition to that, you also came out with a free ebook called Awaken the Creator Within, which is also a fabulous read. I highly recommend that you check it out. So again, judimiller.net is where you can find both the ebook Awaken the Creator Within and pre-order her book Perfect, which will launch on July 21st. Judi, any last words of wisdom that you want to share with our listeners today?
Sure. And I also just want to mention something that was a great summary. As a launch special, the ebook is actually only 99 cents. So
Fantastic.
in addition to the ebook, you get the 5 bonuses as well. So in terms of, you asked me before about the book Perfect in the title. In the experience that I had that I go through in the book, I really realized the perfection and the beauty of the universe and how we are perfect. All of us are perfect. We're all born worthy. And the reason I mentioned that is because sometimes we don't feel worthy. But
Mm,
when we see that life is really one huge puzzle with no wrong pieces, all pieces perfect and part of the whole, life becomes so much easier.
fabulous. Judi, thank you again. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the courage it took to put the book together. I am so grateful to know you. I am so grateful to have you as one of my miracle sisters who has been nothing but inspirational to me. So thank you so much, and congratulations. And let's hope that it becomes a bestseller pretty quickly.
Thank you, Jennifer, so much. It's always great to chat with you.
All right. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Take care.